Welcome to the Australian Property Investment Podcast with your host, Aaron Christie David. Each episode, we ask an expert to share their key insights for aspiring investors to make confident property choices.
G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Christie David, and I run a mortgage broking business called Atelier Wealth. I set this podcast up to help property investors make better property decisions, and a big part of making good quality decisions is having education and access to what I call best in breed. So experts who know exactly what they're talking about because they do this day in and day out. And today in the studio, I'm joined by Craig Reeve from Reeve Law. G'day, mate.
Hey, Aaron. How you going?
I'm doing fantastic. Mate, full disclosure, we've known each other for a number of years.
We
Our paths
have, more
crossed.
than I care to admit, yes.
Mate, correct. And I guess over that time I've seen, I guess you personally flourish and change. Your life has changed. We'll touch on that in a second. And your business evolve and adapt, and I guess have an extra string to your bow, which is property developers and what to look out for, I guess, as your business has matured and taken some more savvier clients. Now you know kind of what makes them tick. So the topic that we want to explore today is the art of property development, what you'd need to know from a legal perspective. So yourself being a lawyer, specializing in property, I really feel like this is your domain, and I just want to kind of get into your brain and figure out, what people need to know if they're embarking on their journey. That's kind of the first part. And the next part will then be someone that's maybe a little bit more experienced. Where do they go when they're trying to build or develop more properties as well as they go on their journey? But before we do kick off, a bit of an intro to yourself. I mean, you've been in the legal game for well over 10 years now. So I've seen your bio. So Lend Lease, you've had a number of years experience there as well. The Department of
started off in criminal law, actually. Yes. But that was before I had my law degree, just in admin with the Director of Public Prosecutions there. So putting the bad guys away, so to speak.
As you do with every good lawyer's dreams, right, of putting the baddies away. And now we're now working on property. And I guess you've evolved. So your Reeve Law is a family-owned, operated business.
It is, yeah. So it's me and my lovely father, who fortunately I get on very well with. Probably helps that I'm based in Sydney and he's based in Port Stephens and separate offices. But no, we get on like a house on fire, so it all works very well.
Excellent. Family and business. I mean, obviously I break every rule when it comes to family and business, but there's a great stat that family businesses do outperform sometimes other businesses as well. I guess you can have those candid conversations and really not hurting each other's feelings. This is strictly business perhaps as well.
Yeah, definitely.
On a what I call the 3 Ps, so personal life, professional, which is work life, and then property side. On a personal note, I mean, you've got 2 lovely children now as well, kind of just a little bit older than mine, but how's fatherhood treated you?
Yeah, it's good. It's I mean, it's the best and hardest thing you're ever going to do. That's what I always say. But they're lovely, almost 5 and almost 2, my 2 kids, and they're just growing every day, as you know, and every day there's a new experience to relish or suffer through.
I mean, if we thought we were busy before, watch out, right? What did we do with all that spare time beforehand?
No idea. I thought I was busy then.
On a business side, I know you said you're growing your team, so take us through how your business has kind of evolved and adapted now as well.
Yes, I mean, really did just start out as a 2-man band, basically. My dad and I, and we've managed to bring on, conveyancers and a couple of lawyers now, and some admin staff. So it's growing slowly, but well.
That's a good way to grow, though.
We've got a good solid business that we're, quite happy with. We've been going for, next Feb it'll be 7 years. So awesome. So it's a good stint, and we're still here, still
standing and thriving. Yeah, correct. Beautiful, mate. No, congratulations. Well done. I mean, 7 years in business with the old man. It's obviously a testament to you guys and doing the work, doing good quality work as well.
Yeah, that's what we like to think anyway. It's always about the clients. So
exactly.
Yeah.
No clients, no business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Spot on.
Perfect, mate. As we kind of get into it, roll our sleeves up and jump into it. So when we're talking about property development, I guess from my perspective, a lot of people would jump into it, get excited, maybe a subdivision on a block, maybe, for example, duplexes, granny flat. That's kind of a good entry point. And then as people start to move in, maybe units, townhouses, more properties in one block, or as they start to get more blocks, for example. When someone's coming to you and they've got the idea of developing property, what are your kind of initial, not red flags, but what's kind of your initial pointers for your discussion before they start to go down the path a little bit too far that they haven't considered some of the thoughts or ideas that you may have to bring to the table as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the first one is probably most relevant to you, actually.
Yes.
It comes down to finance. It's
Absolutely.
really how are you going to pay for it? It might be that you have a property already that you're going to use. If it's one of those smaller property deals where you're just going to buy a big block, subdivide it, put a duplex on it or something like that, you might be able to just use the security of your own home to do that. Of course, there's more at risk when you do that, but it's a good way to raise capital. But once you get into a bigger project, you're talking about sometimes multiple levels of financing. You might not be able to go to one of the big banks because it's just a little bit too risky.
You probably don't have like a portfolio of development. You're what they call a new developer. So there's no track record
there. So it's really a question of how are you going to fund it and who's going to fund it for you? Because the last thing you want to do is commit to a deal and then find you can't put the money together to actually finalize it. You'll lose a massive deposit, potentially be up for more money. And during the process, you'll also be spending money on people like, lawyers, for example, but also other consultants who are absolutely part and parcel of any property development deal.
Yeah, great. You mentioned there about partners, and it's kind of definitely one of the parts I want to have a chat to you about, which is, I guess, as you go down this path, it becomes an area of specialization. So, your mortgage broker, typically, because if you're going to one bank, you're only going to get one response. So you definitely use a broker. Solicitor, for example, a lawyer.
Yep.
You're definitely going to want, I guess, a buyer. Most clients will use a buyer's agent to avoid any pitfalls, for example, buying the right type of block that suits their scope or their needs. And take us through some of the other partners that you'd suggest on the journey as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So an important one that people often don't think of is someone like a town planner or an urban planner.
Yep.
Because
why are they important, do you think?
Well, every block has its own limitations and its own restrictions. There are things like, there's the council planning regulations, which are going to restrict what you can and can't build on any block in a given area.
Yeah.
Things like easements and covenants that might affect the block. Obviously, as a lawyer, I'm looking at those as well.
Yeah.
But
so you're a trained eye. What are you looking there exactly for when you say like easements or covenants for people that don't exactly know what that is?
Yeah. So there might be something like a natural watercourse or a sewer drain that runs through the property.
Yeah.
There's essentially something on the title to that property that you can't remove to make sure that you don't interfere with that sewer drainage, for example.
Yeah.
And there are ways to get around it, but it gets more expensive. Basically, if you have to redirect a whole sewer main, Sydney Water aren't going to let you get off cheap, unfortunately, or whatever water authority it is. So just those sorts of things that an untrained eye just wouldn't know to look for. And as I said, as a lawyer, I'm looking for it, but town planners, they're all over that as well.
Yeah.
They'll know what you can do to mitigate the cost and the risk that are associated with that.
Yeah.
And they're also going to be able to tell you, what you can and can't build. They'll probably be the one who's doing a feasibility study on the property to say, this is actually going to make you money, or, maybe you're going to spend 3 years on it. And if you only come out with a small amount of money at the end, it's really not worth your time. So that's one. Another property professional that you'd want is probably an architect, ready to go, because, it is a time game. When you're doing a property development, you can't most people can't just sit on an expensive block of land and just land bank it.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are big, rich people or big companies out there who can do that. But if you're just getting started, you need to be able to move quickly. So you really do need to have that architect lined up, ready to go to design it, so you can put your DA in as quickly as possible to council. It reduces your holding costs that way, and the
clock is ticking. Effectively, by the time it's settled, you got repayments that you're making, or
you're
these
paying
costs
interest.
are starting to build out as well.
And interest is you're not making money off interest. It's there to help you hold the land, but you want to minimise that as much as possible.
And you mentioned there when it goes into the council DA process as well. So take us through that, because obviously every council's different and their timelines are very different, as we've probably experienced as well. Do you see like an estimate that you tell people, hey, this is possibly how long you might be sitting in limbo waiting for these council plans to be approved?
Yeah. So for a simple thing like a duplex, you'd be looking at minimum 6 months, I would say.
Right.
For if you're going to be going into more like a multi-unit development of some sort, of townhouses or apartments, you're well over 12 months, I would say, would be a safe bet, and you should factor that in. You might be lucky, you might get something quicker, but you definitely shouldn't count on that. If you're going to be on a shoestring budget and you're counting your pennies, then it blows out, and your time frame blows out by 6 months, then you're going to be struggling to actually hold on to the block. So, and unfortunately, most lenders aren't willing to just sort of give you a free pass on interest or mortgage repayments just because your DA is taken too long.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier as well when we talk about the feasibility study, and this is probably one of the most underrated parts because people just go in, hey, look, I buy it, I build it, I sell it, net cost. And it's like, well, hang on. Yeah, that's a very back of the envelope type scenario. However, when I've seen feasibility studies and I've seen them done well, there is a level of detail that goes into these.
All those costs that no one envisages except for the professionals. And I'm not saying I'm one of those. I look at feasibility studies and often see things where I'm like, oh, yeah, I didn't think of that cost either.
So what's some of the costs that you maybe have seen that you come up and go, hey, might not have expected that, or that's something that people need to include in there as well?
Well, I mean, any decent town planner will tell you, I mean, with a council, you've got contributions you have to make to council just to do a development.
Yeah.
And for a larger development, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars often. Even for a duplex, you're probably looking at 5 figures to pay the council just for essentially the infrastructure cost that council incurs as a result of you doing a development. Otherwise, you have all the consultants that might come up, hydrological engineers, civil engineers, structural engineers.
We're seeing trees become a major issue.
Arborists, all those sorts of things. Bushfire experts, if you're buying a property in a bushfire-prone area. They're not things that most people will think about. Whereas, someone who is experienced in doing a feasibility study will think of those things.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah. And they'll also factor in, legal costs, mortgage broking fees, loan fees, even establishment fees, because some of these products have large establishment fees. Because it's not an off-the-shelf product.
To give a bit of transparency there. So if you're talking setup fees, application fees, establishment fees, if you're not going to a major bank, if you're not going to maybe in a second tier, you're going to a specialist lender that will lend to maybe first-time, second-time developers, there are going to be maybe slightly higher rates and there's going to be fees, and that's effectively how those banks, I guess, make their margin through fees.
That's how they cover off their risk, basically. Yeah. If you default, yes, they've got the property there as security, but they still spend a lot of time up front, putting together all the documentation.
No lender wants to actually repossess the property, right?
Never.
They're there to help you. The loan's the vehicle to help you go through your project, and that's why they price it. That's why they'll lend it to you.
Yep.
But they also need to cover their butts as well.
They want you to make money so that you come back to them and get a bigger loan next time and pay more interest on that loan, basically. Yeah.
And when people go to council, and again, tell me if this isn't your domain, for example, and it doesn't get approved, what's the recourse at that point? Is it back to the drawing board? Is it tweaks to their plans? Like, what happens at that stage?
Yeah, so there's usually a process. Obviously, it does vary depending on the level of complexity of the project. Yeah. But usually you would have pre-lodgement meetings with the council to begin with, and they'll give you an indication. They'll say, listen, there's no chance of this project getting up. Just you're on a pipe dream here. Don't even think about it. Or they might say, listen, you're going for 10 stories on an apartment building and it's zoned for 5. There's no way we're going to give it to you.
Yeah.
But it might be that you can just make a tweak here and there. So setback might be increased by another meter from the street so that it's not quite so imposing to the streetscape and those sorts of things. There is a process that council will generally go through. If it becomes an outright refusal, yes, it's actually not. We don't get into the whole local environment law. There are specialists who just do that.
Yeah.
But there is a land and environment court process. You can appeal. You won't always win, and not all developers do. But it might be that process then results in more negotiation. And eventually you reach a point where, both parties are mostly happy.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And again, we're talking more fees. We're talking court.
Lots of fees. Land environment court's not a cheap process. Definitely not.
Yeah. So you want to kind of avoid that
if you can avoid it, the consultation process is much more effective.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
That's kind of when things are maybe going off the tracks a little bit. When they say on track and when you've seen projects done very well, can you take us through maybe a couple of examples where you go, hey, look, this is a client project that we saw and here's what a great project looked like and here's why it had the success.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had a few duplexes go through where the plans were drawn up. It's all, you can even do a duplex as a complying development sometimes, which is much easier and quicker than a development application.
Yeah.
You just use private certifiers in those circumstances and it's easy and quick. So you don't have to worry about the whole DO process quite as much. You still have to pay contributions to council, but the process doesn't take nearly as long. And then you've got, apartment buildings, as long as they're built within you've got a planning certificate there. It's easy to get, it takes 5 minutes to order and council get it to you generally within a day. That'll tell you what the zoning for the land is. And that gives you an idea of what you can build. The best indication is usually what's around the property that you want to build.
Yeah.
If you're the first in the street to go up to, 5 stories instead of surrounded by 2-story houses, you might have a bit more trouble than a street that's all of a sudden full of 5-story buildings. So, and you're sort of, maybe there's 2 being built right now and you're the third in a row of 10.
Yeah.
That one's usually going to be a pretty easy one to get through. So I would say that those processes are generally a lot simpler, a lot easier.
Yeah. Okay. I guess tricks for new players. When say you're talking to someone that's fairly new in the process, like how are you getting their head in the game and go, look, here's what you need to know about politely. It's not a condescending chat. It's going, hey, look, we want this to work. We all want this to work. We're on the same side here. Here's some things like we talked about, getting the right team, for example, doing your feasibility. Are there any other?
There's those things, and you also need to think about, and it's a very close conversation with accountants as well. Whenever it comes to these sorts of things, you have to get accountants involved because there's so many tax implications.
Yeah.
There's GST, there's income tax, there's capital gains, there's a lot of things to consider.
Yeah.
And you have to think about in consultation with that accountant how you're going to structure the entity that's going to do the development. Usually, it's not me as Craig Reeve doing a development in my own name. You might set up a company. You might have a trust, unit trust. If you have multiple investors coming in, they all want to make sure that they're protected as well. So that structure of the entity doing the development is actually extremely important. It both helps from a finance perspective, from a tax perspective, and also from a protecting your own personal assets. It's also very important as well. If you're just starting out, chances are you're going to have to put some skin in the game. It might be that if you want to get a block that's suitable for subdivision into 2 lots for a duplex, which we've been using as an example, if you've never done it before, the bank's going to say, listen, well, we need to protect ourselves here. What have you got capital-wise? Either you're going to have to put in a lot of cash so that you're not borrowing as much, or you might have to put, sort of get a second mortgage on a home or something like that. Just to protect, it's just the bank protecting their own interests. So, but then by doing company structures and those sorts of things, you can actually sort of remove that risk so that you're not going to literally lose the roof over your head.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. And when you talk about, say, and this is exactly what we was trying to allude to, is company structures, for example. Yep, you absolutely need to engage your accountant because the profit on the upside, you put that in your individual name, you might be up for a fair amount of capital gains. And like we always say in this is always intended as a general in nature.
Very general.
So we're not giving advice. However, it would be foolish of us to not talk about the tax implications because you're doing this to make a profit. It's the only reason you're going to develop property is to make a profit.
Yep.
What are you going to do with that profit, for example? And you put that into individual names. Typically, someone has the means and the ability to do something generally on a fairly decent income, which means they're already paying enough tax. However, now they're going to go down this pathway. They're going to pay far more tax. We all agree we love our government. We probably need to give them a pay rise if we can avoid it, perhaps. So then how are we getting smart about our tax obligations and implications of selling as well, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
And each state has its own each state will have its own different laws, say, around land tax and then
around land tax,
national,
capital gains is national, income tax is national, but those things are all really important questions. And as I said, that comes back to having the right team around you. You know, it's also that we actually didn't mention them at the beginning, but the accountant is an extremely important cog in the machine. Yeah.
And even a financial planner can be quite helpful as well. From a cash flow perspective, like what are you looking to do to reinvest, for example, as well. They'll know your cash flow. So having the team will get bigger. What you really want is a team kind of singing off the same hymn sheet, though, really, isn't it? And not kind of contradicting one another. They will come from a very different angle, like our world's finance. I'll look at it from that perspective. You look at it from a legal perspective, but as long as we're on the same page, the client gets the right outcome. It's a win-win-win for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's always the traditional battle between the builder and the architect. That's always
let them fight that out.
They can fight that out. It's always fun to see.
And that's why sometimes it's easy when they're kind of under one roof as well. I've seen that before, and that is a little bit helpful. I always say you can't build things off 2 different blueprints, and that's a classic example when you got like the builder, the architect, and even sometimes the interior designer, especially when you're kind of designing a duplex or to resell for a family. Who is the person that's going to buy this? And again, we talk about the team. I'll get a number of clients to speak to a real estate agent. What does the market want? Don't overcapitalize sometimes, for example. They don't want the bells and whistles. They want maybe something that they can add a flavor to.
And don't build something cheap in an area where people want the best. Basically.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well said. So you've got to know what the market wants. If you're going to intend to sell it, not keep it, for example, who are you ideally trying to sell this to? Is it downsizers, for example? Is it upgraders? Is it families? Is it double income, no kids.
First home buyers, it's often an important one, especially for sort of multi-unit developments.
Yeah, spot on. And then let's say I've got a development under my belt, for example. I've done one, now I'm starting to grow in confidence and I want to start to build. Again, how do you then come into the picture and say, look, you've got a little bit of confidence now. Rolling stone gathers a little bit of moss. What happens?
It definitely does. And I mean, the beauty of having a couple of developments under your belt, one, you didn't fail on the first one you did.
Made money.
You made money, and it means you're probably still making a little bit of money at least each time. And that builds your war chest, basically. So it might mean that you can go out and have a different strategy to acquire the land.
Yeah.
Instead of having to just go and buy a big block of land and get a loan from a bank with a really high interest rate, you might now have the capital to go pay a few option fees to a row of landowners. Yeah. You negotiate with them, separately but together. And instead of just saying, all right, I'm going to pay you all, there's 5 lows on a lot, I'm going to pay you all $1 million, in 2 months.
Yeah.
You can say, here's 10 grand in your pocket for me to buy it for $1.1 million in, 18 months.
Yeah.
And that gives you the time. You're only outlaying 50 grand. Let's say it's 10 grand each time. You're only outlaying 50 grand at that time. It gives you the time to then go do that DA process. And if you get a DA approved in that time, yes, you might be paying over market value with what you've negotiated with them. But once you have a DA approved site for 5 lots, the value is going to be massively more on those 5 lots put together.
Yeah.
Because the DA approval itself means that you can even on-sell the option to someone else, make a profit that way. You don't actually have to do the development yourself if you're not comfortable in doing, an actual construction, which often, and also the significant cost involved just with construction loans.
Deep pockets, right? So often people then get to that stage where like, I'm going to get to this stage, but this is now they're going to a corporation, a professional development company, as opposed to maybe a solo or a partnership.
Yeah, and you're looking at $10 million construction cost, and a lot of people just don't. One, they don't have the means to do it, or two, they don't want to take the risk on that. And there are ways that you can still make money from property development without actually having to fully develop the land all the way through to off the plan sales. There's a lot of strategies you can employ. Yeah,
and then I guess when we're talking about the professional side and coming out when these developments get a bit bigger is some of the defects that come up. And certainly I don't want to be a wet blanket, but this is something that needs to be spoken about openly. I mean, we see this is probably one of the top things on people's checklists now for buying units.
Massively. It's been all through the news. We've all seen
it was never a thing probably when I bought my units years ago, right? It was never on anyone's radar to check cladding. No one even didn't even register. No. That's probably one of the first things that people will be checking now is cladding, for example. And
or cracking.
Right.
After some of the recent ones.
Sinkholes and they've kind of broke. I think there was that one out at Parramatta from there. That was landmark case. But what are some of the other defects potentially that you see that come up from time to time as well?
So part of when I was with, it was Lendlease, and before then was Abbey Group Contractors, which was a slightly smaller contractor, still pretty big, but they got bought by Lendlease.
Yeah.
A large part of my job was actually defects litigation.
Right.
I was acting for the builder. So we were trying to defend the defects litigation and saying with every single apartment building, there's going to be something.
Yeah.
There always is. It doesn't matter how well it's built. There's going to be something that happens, even if it's just settlement cracks. The ground is not a solid thing. The ground moves slightly and concrete then moves, and there are slight settlement cracks, and some things are acceptable and some things aren't.
Right.
The biggest problems that you find in badly built buildings are water ingress, coming in through windows and sliding doors.
Right. And
fireproofing issues. You wouldn't even think about that because you don't see it when you're in an apartment, but it's in the walls all throughout the building.
Right.
And if it's not done properly, obviously then a major safety risk.
Yeah.
And it's really important to make sure that they're covered off. But the builder would factor that in, and they're liable for it. There's protections under the relevant legislation, the Home Building Act, and other legislation out there.
And that warranty, for example, how is that typically?
So that's it's 2 years for minor defects. At the moment, we're talking about New South Wales here. It varies throughout the country, but 2 years for minor defects, and that's things like your cracks and those sorts of things.
Yeah,
it's 6 years for anything major.
Yeah,
and after that, essentially, it's unless there's some sort of exception to the legislation, it's essentially on the owner's corporation to fix defects that relate to the building and on the individual lot owners to fix the defects within their indivial apartments.
Yeah, okay. And then for houses, for example, is it the same for houses?
Yeah, same. It's obviously different issues in houses.
Yeah.
You don't find the same issues, but it's the same protections, which is people don't often realize. You buy a house that's 2 years old, you have 4 more years of protection under the legislation. You can go back to the builder and say, come back and fix this.
Yeah.
They might go and get their own builder to come and they'll pay the builder to do it when they can actually go see the original builder. And if that builder's gone bankrupt, there's then insurance to cover them.
Yeah.
So
take me through that, because I mean, the building game, there are plenty of good quality,
absolutely,
highly respected builders. And then I guess sometimes, like any industry, there's a couple of bad apples, and then Phoenixing, for example, is probably the one where it gets thrown around. But sometimes people say that builder's not around. So what's the recourse at that stage, do you think?
Yeah, so there is protection, basically. Every single, major build, anything over, I think it's $20,000. I'd have to check what it is at the moment.
Yeah.
But there's a thing called the Home Building Compensation Fund.
Okay.
It used to be called Homeowners Warranty Insurance, but it's changed names, of course, as they like to do. Didn't change anything apart from the name.
Same, but
just
different.
to make it more confusing.
Yeah.
But basically it means that if the builder who built your property has gone bankrupt or into administration or even died, for example, it might be an individual who's died, then you can go make a claim on this fund, the Home Building Compensation Fund, and they'll actually pay out the cost of the rectification for
Excellent.
you. You can then go get another builder, or they might assist you in the process of getting another builder to actually spend the money that they've paid to fix up the defect. So there is protection, but it is, as I said, only for that 2-year period and 6-year period. So after that, you're sort of left to fend for yourself.
And when someone's doing their and this is kind of just a slight change a little bit here, but pre-settlement inspections, for example. So clients are going out there. Now, here's the thing. They've already bought the property. They've committed to it. And then the pre-settlement inspection, they're going through with a fine-tooth comb. What's your advice when people are just about to settle and they're going through that pre-settlement? And that's generally 1 to 2 days before handover, for example, settlement date. What's your advice to someone at that stage going, here's what you need to look out for, and here's maybe what's out of scope, for example, as well?
Yeah. So I guess, are we talking new builds or are we talking
let's go established, because this is slightly different when we talk about
because you do have you have a defects regime in new builds generally, which is reasonably comprehensive. You have more rights, basically, because they know that they're up for it under the legislation. Established dwellings is different. You almost have to weigh up the cost of what's it going to cost to fix this and what's it going to cost to make a claim against the vendor. There's very little in a pre-settlement inspection that's actually going to entitle you to say, I'm not settling today, or I'm not settling tomorrow until you fix this. It would have to be something very major, basically. And so basically what you're looking for are missing items that were meant to be included. On the front page of every contract, there's inclusions.
The dishwasher.
If they've taken very few people would, but you never know. They might have taken the dishwasher, put it on the back of a ute and taken it to their new house. So those sorts of things to look out for. Major damage or plumbing issues especially. The key there is to make sure that people don't think about it when they're looking at the property for the first time.
I mean, you get 20 minutes on a weekend.
You get 20 minutes on a weekend.
You don't really get a chance to lift the hood on the property. And I guess it's full, right? So the property's either staged or it's lived in, so you don't get a chance to see it in its bare state, but generally a couple of days out it is empty.
Yeah, exactly. So all those things that were hidden by rugs or furniture, all of a sudden are apparent. So the argument then becomes, did it exist at the time you signed the contract?
Yeah. Or
has it come up since then? Most of the time they will say it's pre-existing. The vendor would say it's pre-existing. I'm assuming I'm acting for the purchaser here.
Yeah.
But every now and again, I've had one where there was a major plumbing leak in an upstairs bathroom between the time of signing the contract and the settlement date. Right. So we managed to negotiate $20,000 back for my client to cover that off. Right. That's pretty rare that those sorts of major issues happen. Usually it's going to be a bump on a wall and a scratch or that's
a removalist. Maybe you may
removalist might have done it, and again, it could have been hidden by furniture. It might have been there when you signed the contract. It's always a matter of negotiation when it comes to those sorts of things.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Excellent. That's really good advice. That's probably one of the biggest questions that do jump out from a lot of people is that pre-settlement side. But man, it's been great to have a chat about the property development side first and foremost. I think I feel as property values have increased, as feels that people's homes have increased. People have been sitting on blocks that typically are bigger now. So probably our parents' generation that had these bigger blocks, for example. Yeah. What's the joke? We're not developing good cricketers at the moment because we don't have big backyards.
No one can afford it anymore.
Correct.
Especially in Sydney. Yes.
Yeah, right. So, and that's why I guess there's a couple of moves as people maybe looking at other markets such as Perth, Adelaide, Brisbane, where they're getting their bang for their buck. Freestanding house on a larger block of land, ideally the great Australian dream, which is they call it a quarter acre block. I don't think it needs to be that big at the moment, but it's something with a backyard and livability, and that is your castle.
Yep.
But then people that are now looking at some of these bigger blocks and think sometimes that's through estate planning that comes up as well, going, what do we do with mum and dad's property if and when they pass away.
Yep.
What are our options? And so this conversation is now coming up more and more. But yeah, your thoughts and insights are super helpful, mate. So thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. Of course.
Thanks very much. So if you're looking to get in touch with Craig, his details will be and his bio will be in the link below as well. As always, it's been an absolute pleasure to bring someone like yourself into the studio, Craig. Thank you very much. If you found this episode helpful, feel free to leave us a review or get in touch with myself or Craig. And until next time, take care.